Well, hey, you guys, welcome back to the salon, and we're jumping back into talking about the series Thriller with Boris Karloff from the 1960s. I've been doing this for a very, very long time, and as I mentioned before, I used to do 6 episodes per video, but now I'm just doing one at a time because they're just easier for me to do, obviously. So, when we last left, we're still in season 2. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about season 2, episode 9, which is called A Third for Pinochle. Now, this one was directed once again by Herschel Daugherty, which a lot of these were, and it was written by Mark Hanna and Boris Sobelman. Now, this episode is another one based around a murder plot, so it's kind of more a crime story, but I will say that this episode probably one of the more comedic ones, actually definitely one of the more comedic ones than most of the episodes so far. The biggest vibe this gave me was arsenic and old lace. It's kind of similar to that, and it's also kind of similar to a story that they did on Thriller back in season 1. I think it was episode 31, which was called A Good Imagination. And the thing about it is that A Good Imagination and this story, A Third for Pinochle, even has the same actor, Edward Andrews, playing the same type of kind of overconfident, smug, like self-satisfied kind of killer. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So how you feel about the more comedic episodes of Thriller, I mean, that will be up to you. Personally, I thought this one was a hoot. I mean, I laughed out loud like many, many times at these just wacky hijinks. And the performances are like really entertaining all around. Don't expect anything scary or suspenseful or anything like that at all. This one is just purely a dark comedy. So the pre-credit sequence plays out completely in silhouette, which I thought was kind of cool. There's a guy, and he's packing a suitcase in his bedroom, you're led to assume, when this old lady sneaks up behind him and essentially like caves his head in with a meat cleaver. And then like another old lady comes in and kind of gently admonishes her for like, what did you do? You know what I mean? Murdering a guy like that. Don't be so silly. It's like that kind of vibe to it. And then after Boris Karloff's amusing introduction, we discovered that these two old ladies, like the one that killed the guy and then the other one, are sisters, and their names are Melba and Deidre Penneroyd. And the murdered man was their brother. I don't even remember if they said what the brother's name was. They probably did, but I don't remember. We also discover that neither one of these old bats is playing with a full deck, as the saying goes. Deidre is clearly the nuttier one. She's the one that did the murder. Now, the two of them, they live in this big ramshackle old house and kind of spend their days playing cards and also spying on their neighbors through binoculars. So the main neighbors that they're keeping tabs on are Maynard and Mrs. Thisben. I don't think Mrs. Thisben is ever given a first name. Now, they live across the street. Now, Mrs. Thisben is this nagging, imperious old battle axe who just constantly makes demands of her husband, like she orders him around like a servant. Hey, go get me some tea. Hey, do this, I do that, and the other thing. Maynard appears mild-mannered and is very happy to cater to her wishes because she's rich. But it's obvious that there's some pretty long-standing resentment that's kind of festering. And this suspicion is confirmed pretty overtly when a delivery guy shows up at the door with some cyanide that Maynard ordered. That's pretty slick, yeah. Now, because his wife is right there, I don't know if he did that on purpose, like to freak her out, or if he was expecting her to be gone, because as we'll see, she's going on a trip soon, or whatever, but I'm not really sure. So yeah, so he turns up. So his wife is right there, though. So Maynard is just kind of like, oh, never mind, I don't want it, and like sends the dude away. And then he tries to cover his ass by telling his wife that he only bought it to kill like some very particularly stubborn weeds that they have in the yard. And I'm like, right. Now, shortly after this, Maynard kind of toddles down to his little basement man cave. And we find out that he has a secret phone, like, stashed. He keeps it hidden in this, like, little coal heater type situation. And he pulls it out and hooks it up so he can call a potential mistress. I don't think they're seeing each other yet because it seems like he just got her number and he has this little black book and he's like, hey, I'm so-and-so. I met you at this whatever the hell. Because she's like, who the fuck is this at first? You know what I mean? Now, her name is Babs. So he talks to her for a little bit and kind of sets up a date. And then he also has this like hidden compartment in the wall, like one of the boards like slides up or whatever. And behind that, he has like a paper mache head of his wife, like a fake head. And I'm just like, what is that? Why does he have that? And then for a second, I'm just kind of like, he had it for a silly reason. He does actually have it for not a legitimate reason, but he did have like an actual reason for having it that's not stupid. Because he takes the head out and then he strangles the head with a scarf like he's practicing. You know what I mean? So the deal is, as I mentioned earlier, that Mrs. Thisben is about to set out on a very long trip. I don't know how long it is, but she takes a fuck ton of luggage with her, and she's talking about the way she's talking about it is like she's never returning. So it's like, it's going to be a long trip, I guess. So she's going to visit her sister, and she's going to leave on a train like that evening. Now, Maynard actually has plans to murder her before she goes, but is going to fix it so it looks like she left on her trip and then got killed later. Now, it seems like he has everything pretty well ironed out. Like, this hauling service shows up and loads all of Mrs. Thisben's many, many pieces of luggage into a truck. And then the crazy sisters across the street are like watching them out the window. They even come out on the porch, like, to flirt with the two much younger guys that are like packing up the truck. And, you know, they're just kind of looking at each other like, what the fuck is this all? Why are these two old biddies hitting on us? It's pretty funny. Now, Mrs. Thisben sends Maynard on an errand to buy a bunch of bird seed so he can feed all of her. She has a whole bunch of pet birds, so obviously so he can feed them while she's gone. Like, he has to buy like 6 big boxes of it or something. So like I said, she's going to be gone for a while. And while this happened, we see that this, as I mentioned, she's rich. And you can see that this crotchety old hag is like really loaded because she pulls out this huge fat wad of cash to like peel 3 singles off, like to give him to go buy the bird seed. Now, so Maynard goes and buys the birdseed, and then he drops by to see Babs at her apartment. And he basically tells her, oh, as soon as this close relative kicks the bucket, I can buy you a nicer apartment and this expensive mink stole that she wants and all this other kind of stuff. And she's just like, ooh, tell me more. You know what I mean? Now, I thought the implication was that he also banged her when he was at the apartment. But of course, I mean, this is 1961, and you couldn't say stuff like that on TV. So you can just... I guess you just imagine it, whatever. And Maynard either purposely or accidentally leaves the birdseed at Babs's apartment. Now, I thought this was going to play into the plot as like a clue that would point to his guilt somehow, even though I couldn't really think of how it would. But it really didn't. It really only ended up being like a setup for a really brief, like, throwaway joke later on. So after Maynard gets home, and the wife doesn't seem to notice that he didn't bring the birdseed home, so I don't know what that was all about. I don't know what the point of that was, the birdseed. Now, he pretends to be happy about helping his wife write goodbye notes to all of her many, many friends, because remember, it's like she's going to be gone, like, forever. And he basically like sits there just seething while she starts phoning a bunch of them too. And she's saying, well, it wouldn't be proper for me to just take off on this long vacation without telling everyone goodbye. You know what I mean? So this takes like forever, and he's obviously getting really exasperated. And it finally seems like she's done. And Maynard is like, okay, at last, now I can murder this bitch, right? And so he sneaks up behind her with this scarf, like ready to like throw it around her neck and do that. But various things, because like I said, this is a black comedy, keep intervening to stop him from strangling her. Like a door-to-door salesman rings the doorbell, or the phone rings and it's one of his wife's friends again and wants to have this big long conversation and all this other kind of crap. And obviously he doesn't want to strangle his wife while she's talking on the phone to somebody else. That'd be kind of sus, right? Now, at last, Maynard becomes so impatient that he just picks up his wife's bag, which has like these really heavy glass paperweights in it that she's taking to her sisters as a gift, and he just bashes her skull in with it. And I'm like, ooh, mission accomplished, finally. Now, as an aside, the same door-to-door salesman who interrupted the murder, like one of the times, also goes to the Penroyd sisters' house. Like, he's selling like magazine subscriptions or something like that. Now they, because they're lonely and also kind of crazy, they invite this poor guy in and essentially try to strong arm him into moving into their dead brother's room. Now the guy actually flees from the house in terror, as you would, after Deidre starts chasing him around with the meat cleaver. This whole little vignette isn't really relevant to the larger plot. It was a pretty funny little diversion, but I don't know. I thought it was kind of weird because I was like, the door-to-door salesman like didn't even call the cops or nothing like that, which I totally would if somebody chased me out of their house with a meat cleaver. Maybe that's just me, you know? So anyway, Maynard then takes the fake head from earlier, because remember, he does have a reason for having that, and he pops it on this dressmaker's dummy that his wife was making a blouse on. And he puts it in the passenger seat of the car in the garage. And he also puts his wife's body in the trunk. You don't see him doing that, but you see that it's in there later. He then pulls out of his driveway, and he's fully aware that those nosy-ass Penroyd sisters are watching him, like, from the window. And he even gives them, like, kind of a little bit of theater, right, to make it look more legit, I guess. Like, he stops in front of the house, and he gets out of the car and goes around to the passenger side, like, pretends to talk to her, like, pretends to talk to the dummy. And then he goes back into the house, like, to get her umbrella and, like, puts the umbrella in the car, which I thought was, like, a pretty genius move, actually. So he pulls off the road in this kind of remote area, and he puts the fake Mrs. Thespin in the trunk next to the real Mrs. Thespin's body, and then he drives to the train station. Now, he boards the train and puts his wife's carry-on bag, like, in the storage rack over what I presume is her assigned seat, and then he gets off. And then, very fortuitously, and I'm just like, if this hadn't happened, like, I don't know what he would have done with the plan, but as it so happened, you know, he lucked out, I guess. So this elderly woman shows up on the platform with a bunch of bags, and he's like, oh, I'm going to help her with those. And so he takes all of her bags and stuff onto the train, and he makes sure that the porter, like, or whoever, like, sees him doing that. And then after he gets her all settled, he talks to the porter, like, he gets back off the train, and then he talks to the porter, like, extensively. He gives him this really big tip, and he's like, oh man, I'm so glad to be getting rid of the ball and chain for a while and all this other kind of stuff. Can't live with him, can't shoot him, har har, you know, it's like that kind of stuff. And then he waves at the old lady on the train as though she was his wife, and she waves back because she's like, hey, that's that nice man that helped me with the bags, you know what I mean, even though she doesn't know him from Adam. And Maynard just goes smirking his way back to the car, knowing that he's established a really tight alibi, or so he thinks. So on the way home, he dumps his wife's body in this ravine, like not far from the train station, and when he gets home, he burns the fake head in the fireplace. So it would seem that it was the perfect crime. Now, a little while later, I think they mentioned that it's like 2 weeks or something, there's a police detective at Maynard's house, and he's questioning him about his wife's death. It turns out that somebody called in an anonymous tip that led the authorities to the body. It's really never made clear who the tipster was, because, like, I thought that was going to be revealed at some point, like, who had called in the tip, but none of them makes any sense to me. So it's like, I don't really know who called the tip in. But since the body had been outside for so long, there was no way that the coroner could determine time of death. Now, Maynard, perhaps unwisely, is making absolutely no attempt at all to hide the fact that he's glad that his wife is dead. Basically saying, you know, she's just a stingy old twat, it's like, and he obviously had a great deal to gain from killing her because she was very wealthy and he was like the sole beneficiary of all her money and stuff. And he even says to the cops straight up, he's like, man, I'm going to have a blast, like, spending this old bat's money. I'm going to buy things for all my mistresses and all this other kind of shit. And then he even goes so far as to tell the detective that, matter of fact, I had been planning to kill Mrs. Thespin, but somebody else got to her first. Lucky me. This is either super, super dumb or super smart. I can't decide what. And he even says, I was going to strangle her, though. But obviously, as we know, she ended up being bludgeoned to death because he got sick of waiting around to strangle her. So he's like, see, it couldn't have been me because I would have strangled her. Now, the detective is not stupid. So he still suspects Maynard, obviously. But Maynard's willingness to acknowledge how guilty he looks seems to be kind of throwing the cops off the game a little bit. You know what I mean? Now, the detective concedes that it is entirely possible that somebody on the train saw Mrs. Thespin waving her wads of cash around and bumped her off to rob her and then killed her and threw her in the ravine because, like I said, the ravine was near the train station. But he still wants a better alibi for Maynard. And he's like, okay, well, is there anyone who might have seen you and your wife while she was still alive, like before she left, maybe on the way to the train station? Now, of course, Maynard is entirely aware that the Penroyd sisters across the street saw him, like, because they're always watching through the window. But he plays dumb at first, saying he's like, gee, I can't think of anybody, sorry. Now, then the detective says, well, what about your neighbors? And then Maynard's like, well, I don't know. It's like they're kind of busybodies, you know, and sometimes they do like watch people out the window. So maybe, you know, maybe that's entirely possible. So the cop and Maynard then go to the sister's house. And they confirm that they saw Maynard and his wife in the car together, like on the way to the train station. Now, the detective, who still kind of thinks Maynard did it, he seemed kind of defeated by this. And he seems to accept then, grudgingly, that Maynard indeed did not kill his wife. So Maynard, triumphant, calls Babs, his ostensible girlfriend, or one of his mistresses, I guess. That's the only one they ever show. He says he has a whole bunch. I don't know if he's just making it up. But he calls her later that evening, essentially breaking up with her and saying, hey, I know I said I was going to buy you all this shit. I'm not going to buy you anything because I met this hot redhead and I'm taking her down to Mexico with all this inheritance money that I'm getting. So it seems for a moment that Maynard actually got away with it. But of course, this is 1961 TV. You know that can't be allowed. So there's a little bit of an ironic twist. After he hangs up, after talking to Babs, the phone rings again, like before he can leave. This time, it's Melba Penroyd, and she says Maynard needs to come over to their house immediately. So he's kind of annoyed, but he's also kind of a little bit worried because he's not sure what it's about. So he goes over there. Now, the ladies have set up a game of Pinochle, that's their favorite card game, and they asked him to play with them. And they say, oh, ever since our brother died, they don't mention the fact that Deidre murdered him, you know what I mean? That little detail. It's like, you know, we've only had 2 players, and Pinochle is much more fun if you have 3 players. I mean, I wouldn't know. I know how to play a lot of card games, but Pinochle is not one of them. So Maynard, I guess because he feels kind of bad, he plays with them for several hours and then tells them, hey, you know, gotta scoot. I got stuff to do. I got mistresses and I got all this money and all this other kind of stuff. But at that point, the sisters drop the bombshell. They know goddamn well that it was a dummy in the car with him. They have high-powered binoculars. They were looking through binoculars. There's like, it was obviously a dummy. Like they could see it from close up. And they covered his ass for the police, but they're going to narc on him unless he moves in with them and becomes essentially their eternal third for Pinochle. And there's the title drop. And then they say, like, they're all like happy and joyful and everything. Man, our Pinochle games are like marathon sessions, man. Like sometimes they go on for days at a time. Sometimes we even forget to eat or sleep. And then at this point, Maynard, you know, knowing he's pretty cooked at this point, he gives a fuck my life face, and then the whole thing fades to black. So Boris Karloff, our host, then returns and explains that a couple weeks later, a crazed, exhausted Maynard stumbled into the police station and freely confessed to killing his wife. He just couldn't take it anymore. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison. And then the sisters, I guess they found out about them killing their brother and about them chasing off that door-to-door salesman with the meat cleaver. They both got shipped off to a mental hospital where they were very happy because they had their choice of 400 other patients that they could play Pinochle with. So yeah, like I said, if you're more into the scarier thriller episodes of, you know, Thriller, then you might not dig this one as much, but I thought this one was like a lot of fun. It was over the top, of course, but I think that was part of what made it kind of hilarious to me. The acting performances, again, kind of over the top, but really entertaining. And although there's not much mystery or suspense, it was still a good time, like watching Maynard put his admittedly kind of clever plan into motion and then watching it fall apart. So like I said, if you're more into thriller for the crime or horror stories, you might not like this one as much because it's straight up a black comedy. Like I said, much in the spirit of Arsenic and Old Lace. But I had a ball with it, and, you know, give it a watch and maybe you will too. So that will do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, remember, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys in the salon next time. Bye.